Hey everybody, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Happy to be joined by some amazing panelists. And just really quickly, because we have a very short period of time here, want to make sure that we hear from the experts. We're going to be talking about networks and data centers and how things are becoming. We're seeing more and more content, we're digitizing, and the rollout of new technologies. And I think this is important for all of us, ultimately how that content is passed, how data centers and networks interface. And I think we have some great people who are globally focused to talk through this. Quickly, let's do some introductions. Why don't we start with Sureel and then work our way around to Yali, then Raul, and then Ravi.
Great. Thanks, Tony. It's great to be here. I'm Sureel Choksi, the president and CEO of Vantage Data Centers. We're a hyperscale-focused data center provider. We build and operate data centers across 12 markets, split between North America and Europe.
And hello, I'm Yali Liu with Chayora. At Chayora, we develop and build hyperscale data center campuses in mainland China. So our focus is only in mainland China, and we already have our first data center campus serving the greater Beijing area live in service. And we will be announcing our new data center serving the greater Shanghai area over the next few weeks. Great to be here.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening. Raul Martynek, CEO of DataBank. DataBank is a US-based enterprise data center business. We currently operate 64 data centers in 29 markets, 25 of them in the US, 4 markets in Europe, France and the UK. And we have over 1 million square feet of data center space under management.
Hi, good evening and good morning. My name is Ravi. I'm the Senior Vice President of AGC International, which is a fixed network operator based out of Hong Kong and with global presence across the globe, 25 offices. We are mainly involved in providing carrier connectivity, providing transport for internet companies, OTTs, corporate customers in this space. And today I'll be talking about network connectivity to all the data centers, big and small. Thank you.
Great, and just by way of quick introduction, I'm Tony Rossabi. I didn't introduce myself earlier. I wanted to get to the panelists. CEO of Recovery Point Systems. Happy to be here, and this is my 23rd PTC, so I'm super excited about that. And look, I think why don't we start off with I think this is. We've got network and data center coverage here, but I think it's important to say how are data centers and networks working together to really focus on and cover the massive amount of data deluge and the content that's coming out today. I mean, it's more and more kids. I walk out of my home office, or office, I should say, for right now, and my daughter has 3 screens going at once. So the massive amount of, how are we covering this? How are the network operators and data centers working together? Ravi, why don't we start with you and then work our way back around to Sureel, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, yes, contents are moving and also basically data is moving into data centers, hyperscalers and so forth. Having the right connectivity in terms of size, bandwidth is absolutely necessary. And in this space, if I were to divide it into 3 segments, the first segment is making existing fiber network available, visible to the data center community is very essential. In this space, I think the key is creating the right service platform and activation strategy for these clients that are in the data center and for the data centers themselves and getting them connected. So for example, in Hong Kong, we've got about more than 20 to 25 valuable data centers. We make available a platform, we call it SDX, that would allow users to determine what sort of bandwidth they need, what sort of user experience they require. Completely, it's as though that they are in a Facebook experience. This is one area. The other, second and third, I would say is more relating to how we make the fiber interconnect with different network service providers, because not all data centers we can connect across the globe. So we need to have the right interoperability. So carriers are working together hand in hand to develop that interoperability that would allow the ecosystem to operate on its own. So using blockchain technologies and so forth. So that's the second evolution that's taking shape. Third is as data now needs to reach to new locations, not necessarily in tier 1 cities, especially in emerging markets where the latency requirements into cities for the content to reach. So we are looking out to build new fibers and network to reach to ever more new locations and bring them back to tier 1 cities and tier 1 data centers to make them become the capillary even more reachable across the globe.
Thanks, Ravi. Raul?
So look, I'll obviously speak from a U.S. perspective, very mature market, from a kind of fiber and data center perspective, anytime new providers bring up data centers, all the fiber providers know a lot of customers are going to be there. So I think those are kind of the new pins on the map that happen in kind of the regular course, where I think you see a lot of new construction of fiber is certainly around 5G, which is being supported by a lot of small cells, which are all new locations kind of on street lights and things like that. And the other thing that we're following is particularly close at DataBank, and we made an investment in a modular data center company called Edge Presence, where, is there going to be this concept called the far edge, right? Where beyond kind of regional data centers, do we need to have much more decentralized infrastructure? And obviously those locations will need fiber. And we've started to deploy some of those modular solutions. And ultimately, the fiber providers in those areas understand the concept around, the value of a co-location solution in terms of bringing in carrier neutrality, interconnection, security, all those things. So we're finding it not very difficult to convince them to extend their networks to those locations. So I think the data center and the fiber will continue to exist as the yin and the yang and the chicken and the egg and the other side of the same coin, so to speak, because obviously a data center without fiber isn't a data center, and fiber without a data center has no customers.
That's right. Thanks, Raul. Yali?
Yeah, well, for mainland China, network connectivity is super important. So when we build our data center, we make sure that it's fully carrier neutral. We brought all the major carriers into their fiber into our campus. So that's from connectivity perspective. And I guess the other thing from technology perspective that we are focusing on is really to drive lower PUE and make renewable energy available to our customers. So that's the other perspective.
Great, thanks. Sureel?
Yeah, I mean, for us, on one hand, we're not in the network business, right? We don't offer any kind of network services. We're in the space, power, and cooling business. But on the other hand, we spend inordinate amount of time and always have thinking about network as it relates to site selection. And it used to be, okay, well, if there's network close by or there's several fiber routes close by, then a site is good. But increasingly, as hyperscalers are continuing to expand their presence in existing cloud regions or availability zones, or depending on their vernacular, their cloud areas, latency also becomes a very key criteria in terms of distance and network latency, not only on the primary path, but on the diverse path from an existing data center where they have a cloud environment deployed, versus an expansion data center. The number of fiber entrances, continues to increase in terms of the requirement for diverse paths of fiber into these hyperscale data centers. So that's something we think a lot about in terms of engineering and in terms of site selection. And now, it's even a question of fiber crossings outside the data center. So when you think about where you want to locate a data center, and you think about the complex web of data centers that our customers already have in a given market, understanding even the risk of the need for fiber crossings, which can very quickly disqualify a potential site from consideration is something that increasingly we're thinking about. So network has always been important. It's frankly increasingly important, in terms of what we see in the hyperscale business.
Thanks, Sureel. And I'm going to stay with you here too, Sureel, as kind of dig in a little bit about, as I know you're focused on primarily on hyperscale, but this is really just broad base on where do you think, and this is for everybody, but we'll start with Sureel. Are we in sort of the early stages of adoption of, not just enterprises, but carriers, hyperscalers really moving and transitioning into the data center space? I know it's been a hot market and I've been in it, we've all been in it for 10 years. But I think if you focus on the enterprises, in my interaction, there's some that have adopted it, and there's some that have sort of shied away and are beginning to, take hold of this. Similarly, the hyperscalers they've dived in quite aggressively. But I sort of want to, where are we in that stage and in this metamorphosis of where, as we change and more is moved off premise? And I think, we ask this a lot, but it's good to get a sense of kind of from the experts of what are you seeing out there and kind of where is this evolving?
Yeah, so I'll start, and I think a number of the panelists here are probably more qualified maybe to answer in terms of their experience working directly with enterprise customers. What we see though is that cloud proliferation, I wouldn't say we're in the early innings, but certainly there has been enormous amount of cloud adoption in the US, and increasingly over the last few years, we've seen that wave of adoption extend, for example, north of the border to Canada. We're seeing cloud adoption in South America. We're seeing, significant adoption throughout Europe and growth, as well as into APAC. And so I think that, various countries or geographies are in different phases, but frankly, all of them, inclusive of where it all started in the US, are still in hyper growth mode in terms of the rate of cloud adoption. And, the hyperscalers as a result are having challenges just keeping up. First, demand planning is difficult when your business is growing, maybe in aggregate at 50% compounded annual growth, which is impressive, but individual markets and geographies are growing, several 100% or 1,000%. Demand planning, being able to satisfy the needs of customers in terms of capacity as a result is challenging. And there's a number of different niches and segments of the market, but where we see it is in terms of the cloud provider specifically, requiring massive amounts of capacity to power compute.
Thanks, Raul.
Yeah, so concur with what Sureel said there. I'd say we're in the middle innings. DataBank, we're, as I mentioned, an enterprise data center provider. We have 3,000, customers, ranging from the hyperscale players down to kind of corporates that are more traditional enterprise. I'd say it's hard to discern one kind of macro trend that defines all these digital transformation journeys. Couple, big observations. Number one, as Sureel pointed out, there's still huge kind of momentum behind public cloud adoption. So there's obviously a lot of, applications and data getting consumed by that vertical. At the same time, from a kind of enterprise perspective, they've been building software systems for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We see a lot of enterprises choosing to leave certain kind of legacy systems in traditional co-location, and a lot of that is still on-prem. So there's still, it's hard to find a number that's authoritative, but probably between, at least in the US, call it 30 to 50% is still controlled by enterprises. And then third, I think a lot of what this public cloud growth is about is really just, as they call it, born on the cloud. These are new things that are happening that had nothing to do with kind of traditional ERP, CRM, email, or whatever that an enterprise would do. Machine learning, AI, advanced analytics. These are, again, data analytics. These are, techniques and technologies that really didn't exist 5-6 years ago, and they're going somewhere, right? So a lot of that is also driving that. So I think you got overall though, you have a continual consumption of technology, and that kind of expands beyond software. It goes into every vertical in kind of industry, and that continual adoption of technology drives more data, drives more data center space. So I think from that perspective, we're in the very early innings of technology adoption in terms of where we could go. So it's you know, this thing could, you know, it feels like it's going to just continue to go for a long time until humans decide, you know, they've had enough technology, which if you look at your kids, I don't think we're close to that anytime soon.
Absolutely. Yali?
Yeah, I guess at where we are in mainland China, we feel this is actually not at the early adoption stage. Actually, it's mainstream. Everything is moving to the cloud. Actually, the government put a data center, hyperscale data center, as part of the new basic infrastructure service, and then everything is moving to digital, or they call it digital economy, digital society, or digital government, or governance, etc. So it's in China. Basically, they leap forward. They skip. You know, China is the biggest internet market. There are over 940 million internet users. For example, they basically skipped the, you know, from a financial perspective, skipped the checks or the credit cards, and moving directly to mobile payment. So China is moving forward with everything moving to the cloud, and it's bounce forward basically.
Thanks. Thank you, Ravi.
Yeah, I think from our experience, we've got about 40,000 odd small and medium clients. I'll try to give that a set of experience. I think just what like Raul mentioned, the adoption rate of small medium companies to use services in the cloud, which is co-located in the hyperscale, is much more, the barrier is much lower from the software perspective, right? So with the advent of the COVID, the adoption of collaborative tools, unified communication services are much more easier to be accepted by the small and medium industry segment. In the multinational, we have about 2,500 to 3,000 corporate multinationals across Asia, Hong Kong, Asia. Here in this segment, we see that there's a division between in-prem and also in the data center space. The adoption rate is more still growing through digital transformation. The rate is still 15 to 20% in the data center, but remaining is still in-prem, so the opportunities are still there. The digital transformation cannot happen across in 1 year. It's a maybe 3 to 5 year journey. So you will see this movement into the cloud, into the data center shifting slowly. And it depends on the segment of the industry and also the rules and regulation of the country. We have seen for some experience like an airline company that moves from in-prem to public cloud, complete adoption of public cloud for the ticketing system. They just drop everything from in-prem. So there's a change which is driven not only by cost, but also by different dynamics, data security, and so forth. So all these are driving, but we are going in that direction. And I think in 5 years' time, you would see this tipping to the reverse, whereby the data will be stored much, much more in the cloud rather than in-prem, or a hybrid. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask 2 questions because we have about 8 minutes left. And the first question, and we'll start with Raul, is, you know, what is the, you know, we've been going through a really unique year over the last, you know, actually it's been almost a little over a year now. What is the impact been on your business? And then in 7 words or less, what are the biggest challenges you face for 2021?
Okay. So for us, again, being a very diversified data center business across many markets with a lot of different verticals. COVID was kind of a bit of a two-edged, double-edged sword within certain verticals. Obviously, cloud content technology, there was, more demand in those verticals. With other verticals, more traditional enterprise and certainly directly impacted industries, there was less demand. And in addition, part of that, your prior question, Tony, about enterprise outsourcing, during this period, there's been very little of that, right? Because obviously, logistically, it's just very complicated to move infrastructure and plan that, with the travel restrictions and freedom of movement restrictions. So I think it was a net, they kind of canceled each other out. So we had kind of a year as we expected, but it would have been a lot better, I think, without the COVID impact. In terms of 7 words or less, our biggest challenge, is just continuing to iterate around the value proposition with public cloud being, as prevalent as it is, and being able to support customers around a wider geography. We see customers becoming increasingly more sophisticated and wanting to deal with partners that have more scale so that they can accelerate their business models. And that was one of the big reasons behind our acquisition of zColo. So I know it was a lot more than 7 words, but I'll let the other panelists respond.
Why don't we go to Yali?
Well, so in the past year, in terms of COVID impact, for our business, actually, there are very limited direct negative impact because we focus in mainland China. And actually, in the past year, we were able to pretty much on schedule completed our data center campus, 300 megawatt data center campus serving the greater Beijing area. And we selected a site to serve the greater Shanghai area. So that's the biggest impact, I suppose, is the travel restrictions into China. So some of our executives, our customers, not able to travel into China. That's how I see it. And then in terms of the challenges this year and beyond, I would say that there are a lot of distractions. You look at it, they're everywhere. But the biggest challenge I think we need to focus on is really just to stay focused on our business and not to be distracted.
That's, spot on. With a lot of these distractions, you just need to stay focused. I'm saying the same thing to my daughter in school, and hopefully she'd listen, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Sureel, why don't you jump in and then we'll wrap up with Ravi.
Yeah, sounds good. Fortunately, unlike many other industries, we've been the beneficiaries of continued strong demand in spite of COVID and the pandemic. I think what's been challenging, though, is continuing to hire and integrate new employees either through acquisition or through just organic hiring efforts, and really building a cohesive team and a culture when we're jumping from Zoom or team call to the one call to the next, and we don't have the opportunity to get to know each other and socialize. And so in terms of the challenge for 2021, I think it's really around staying patient and getting through this and getting to the other end, in terms of vaccine and hopefully returning to some degree of normalcy.
Thanks, Raul. Ravi? I think you're muted, Ravi.
For us, I think the challenge is how do we do business in these new norms? Yeah? So where we are in international business, where a face-to-face relationship being in PTC physically to have these negotiations, but doing it on Zoom and doing it virtually, it's still a challenge to achieve the business objective, especially through all the distractions that Yali had mentioned. I understand what you mean, but these are the challenges. But I do see, I like to end it on an opportunistic note. I think the more that we are looking at being connected where data is stored in data centers, no matter big or small, and the role that fiber plays. I think making it all visible, making it all available is key, and how we can work together in this ecosystem is key. Now we are strongly pushing out partnerships in terms of how we use our platforms, tool sets, and so on. And we would like to have conversations with partners, no matter carriers or data centers, hyperscalers or small, to make these tool sets available across the globe. So looking forward for that partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi. There was one question that came in, so I don't want to ignore it. We have 2 minutes left. I'll use those, and I'll pose this to the group. Please jump in. But the question was really around, do you consider energy demands of your data center assets a key challenge? Anybody want to jump in on that? Yes.
It's a massive challenge. And there are markets that have been very energy friendly. I mean, Ashburn, Virginia, the world's largest data center market, is for many years, you ask for power, and no matter how much you need, it magically shows up, a few months later, or maybe in real time. Even in markets like that, I think the sheer demands that we're putting on the power infrastructure through the growth that is being experienced has created constraints and challenges. But as we start to extend into other markets, in particular markets outside the US, but even markets in the US like Silicon Valley, power is often the single biggest challenge and constraint, and ultimately, can either nix a site entirely or delay significantly time to market, or the ability to add the next data module or building or campus, as the case may be.
That's great. I think we're out of time, so we'll end. Thank you, panelists. Yali, Raul, Ravi, and Sureel. Was awesome. I hope next year we will. I won't have to put the background up here, and we'll actually be in sunny Hawaii. And looking forward to seeing everybody hopefully later this year. Have a great year. Good luck, and looking forward to catching up soon. Thanks so much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.